Hello everyone, Helen here and welcome into the Campervan. Chatting to you from Durham in the northeast of England, and sometimes I'm in my craft room and sometimes I'm in the Campervan taking you places. So this today is the second half of my husband Phil and I's trip that we made last October, November, and it was a very rainy trip, but we had a brilliant time. We visited all sorts of interesting places. Thank you to everybody who left very appreciative comments of the first part of the trip. I enjoyed going to all of these places and hearing all the history, and yeah, it was a thank you very much if you did leave a comment. So I'm going to try not to waffle any more today. The last thing I want to say before we get into the trip is it is a bit windy today as I sit out here. And so I hope the sound of the wind isn't going to be disturbing. But anyway, let's get on with it, shall we? So, when I left you last time, we were enjoying a rather rainy Rippon. That's a small city situated halfway between the North Yorkshire moors and the Yorkshire Dales. We just had lunch after a morning looking round the lovely cathedral, and we were off to another indoor place of interest, the Rippon Workhouse Museum. The Rippon Workhouse was built in 1854 to provide for paupers who were unable to support themselves, and later for vagrants as well. And a vagrant meant somebody who lived outside the Rippon area. The buildings consisted of separate accommodation for males, females and children, plus kitchens, a dining room cum chapel, workrooms, schoolrooms and exercise yards. The outdoor surroundings were not really unpleasant, although the rooms were quite basic and austere. A pauper that was seeking to be admitted to the workhouse would wait in the little waiting room and then be taken in front of the board of guardians, who sat in this large room that would probably have been rather a daunting experience for the pauper that was seeking help, especially with the chairman of the board sitting high up on this long-legged chair up on a dais. Once a pauper had been admitted, they had to have a bath, and their clothing was placed in a sulphurous de-infester to be fumigated to remove any fleas and body lice. Couples had to separate into male or female areas of the workhouse, and children, except for young infants, were kept in separate living quarters too, though parents could request an appointment to meet with their child once a day. When vagrants were admitted to the workhouse, they went through the same fumigating process and were given a little cell to sleep in. Life in the workhouse involved sticking to a rigid set of rules. The daily routine included meal times eaten in silence, outdoor exercise time, prayers, work or school, and bed at 9 o'clock. There were all sorts of rules that the inmates had to follow, and these rules were read out to everyone each Saturday after dinner to remind them of what was expected of them. The inmates were supervised by the master and mistress of the workhouse, usually a married couple. They were provided with quite comfortable living quarters with their own dining room, where their meals were brought to them, and a cosy sitting room. Their accommodation was only separated from the dormitories by a locked door because one of their main duties was checking that everyone was okay through the night. It certainly wouldn't have been an easy job looking after the inmates, keeping everyone in line. There were national regulations set down as to what the minimum diet in the workhouse should consist of. The inmates needed to be fed well enough to enable them to do the work they were given. Jobs included working in the kitchens or in the workhouse garden, which provided fresh fruit and vegetables for everyone, and they also kept pigs. The menus were very repetitive: bread, gruel, cheese, suet pudding and broth, with meat a couple of times a week. But overall, the diet was carefully thought out and well balanced. Portions were fixed and carefully weighed, and different according to the age and gender of the inmates. The Rippon Workhouse began to be phased out from 1914, and the buildings were later used as a care home, then council offices, before becoming this excellent little museum. It really is well worth a visit. We left Rippon in the pouring rain and drove to an overnight spot. We had a light tea and a cosy evening listening to the rain pattering down. We'd parked in a car park by a picnic site and reservoir near Ply Bridge for the night. There was a box for donations for anyone wishing to stay there overnight. It was rather a muddy car park with many puddles, but apart from that the location was peaceful and very pleasant. We had a little wander around after breakfast since the rain had stopped, and we had a look at the reservoir and the nearby very fast-flowing stream. Very soon we set off to visit the small town of Ply Bridge. Ply Bridge is a very attractive small town on the River Nid, and apparently Nid is a Celtic word that means sparkling. That's rather nice. The river was quite a torrent when we were there due to the large amount of rainfall that we'd been having, and it was tumbling under the bridge at quite a speed, though the river wasn't nearly as high as the depth marker suggests it might get to sometimes. Through the 19th century, Ply Bridge was a thriving industrial town, supporting industries such as quarrying and lead mining. When these industries began to decline, tourism took over, helping the town to regenerate. Just wandering around the town, there are loads of clues about its history. The Talbot Hotel was a hostelry built in the 18th century that had stabling for 15 horses, and the Crown Hotel, also 18th century, was an early post inn and customs office. The primitive Methodist chapel, built in the early 19th century, next became a Salvation Army citadel and then a theatre. And the Nidderdale Museum is housed in what was once Ply Bridge's workhouse, which also once held German prisoners of war. After stopping in a cosy tea room for refreshments and shelter from the light rain, we had a lovely wander around the old streets of the town, through little alleyways where horses and carts would once have trundled through. I love exploring places where you never know what might be just round the corner or through the other side of an archway. There's a good range of independent shops in the town, like these ones in the beautiful little courtyard where we found the tea room, built with stone that has such a warm and welcoming colour. We were amused by the name of this bakery, Yorkshire born and bred, and then we stopped for ages outside the butcher's shop looking at all the mouth-watering pies before losing the ability to resist any longer and going inside to buy ourselves some treats. And those pies really did taste as good as they looked. On the main street you'll also find a row of shops that are housed in Ply Bridge's oldest buildings, built in the 1660s, and it includes what's reputedly the world's oldest sweet shop, first established in 1827, so it's been there for nearly 200 years. Of course, we just had to go inside. As the rain seemed to be holding off, and we were even treated to the brief appearance of the sun, we decided to go for a little walk. So we headed out of Ply Bridge to visit a huge contemporary work of public art called Coldstone's Cut up on the top of a hill. It was built as a collaboration between the local community and Harrison Aggregates, which is cleverly hidden from view and therefore not a scar on the landscape as quarries often are. The artist who designed the structure, Andrew Sabin, wanted visitors to feel that they were being drawn in along a central passageway with extremely high, sturdy walls that were a nice protection from the strong winds that were blowing across the hill. Straight ahead leads you to a viewing platform allowing you to watch the quarry at work. Most of the rock quarried here is limestone, although lots of other minerals are found here as well. It was fascinating to watch what was going on. To the right and left of the main passageway there are winding passages that spiral upwards, reflecting the shape of ammonites, to viewing platforms. It was really interesting to look at the panel showing the direction of places all around the world and how far it was to those places. I wonder if you can spot any places that are familiar to you, that maybe it's somewhere that you live, perhaps thousands of miles from that isolated spot on a Yorkshire hillside. I really enjoyed spotting some familiar places, such as my birthplace, North Shields, and Durham Cathedral. Enjoying the expansive views of the surrounding hills, we made our way back down from the hillside and took a short detour to visit a site of industrial archaeology, the Toft Gate lime kilns. As we'd already learnt from visiting the quarry viewpoint, the geology of the area is dominated by limestone, and in the second half of the 19th century there was a great demand for quicklime, for mortar and for fertilisers. There are several helpful information boards here that help to bring the site to life. Otherwise it can be difficult to make sense of a series of tumble-down stone structures. And I wouldn't say that these industrial processes are a topic of greatest interest to me, although Phil absolutely loves places like this. But actually being next to the remains of these places does help you to appreciate the importance of these industries to our history, and learning the human story behind them does add to the interest. It would have been dangerous, dirty, hot and strenuous work, and it's alarming to think that the workers here included children employed to break the huge lumps of limestone down to small, manageable chunks before the stones could be dropped into the top of the central furnace. It would have been heated to over 800 degrees centigrade, that's over 1400 Fahrenheit, and that was achieved partly by appropriate ventilation. So at Toft Gate there was an extended flue which can still be seen today, and that led to a square chimney. An intense heat was generated from the process, and apparently travellers passing by on a cold day would stop here to warm themselves by the side of the kiln. Back at the car park we thought we'd have our lunch at one of the picnic tables since it wasn't raining, so we made cups of tea in the van and then had a pie and sausage roll that we'd bought at the Ply Bridge butcher's. Oh, they were delicious. And a couple of treacle tarts. And it all tasted so good eaten out in the fresh air. With not much of the afternoon left and the weather being rather changeable, we drove on admiring wonderful views of the Yorkshire countryside. We really did have quite wide views along the road we went along. It was beautiful. And we stopped at Stump Cavern, a huge show cave. Phil went off to visit the caves, which were actually discovered by the Yorkshire Mining Company in 1860, and very soon after that they opened the show cave to lots of fascinated Victorian tourists. Meanwhile I stayed in the van, watching the weather and doing some knitting. This was the elf teapot cosy that I was making for my sister for Christmas. Darkness soon fell and we returned to the car park by Coldstone's Cut for the night. It was a very damp and misty morning that greeted us when we woke the next day, but very atmospheric too. There's something rather cosy about being shrouded in mist. We did the usual wiping away of condensation on the windows that we have to do when we're out in the van in the colder months. Then we set off in a southwesterly direction to visit the town of Skipton and enjoyed the misty views along the way. Skipton is a busy market town, and of course it is home to the annual Woolly Yarndale Festival. The main street is dominated by a large church and a castle, so once we'd paused in a cafe, we headed straight for the castle, passing Holy Trinity Church that actually dates back to 1300, and over the years it's suffered damage from civil war and fire and lightning strikes. So it's been through the wars, but it's survived. Skipton Castle is one of the most complete and well-preserved medieval castles in England, and it's over 900 years old. King Edward III granted the property to the Clifford family in 1310, and it remained in the ownership of the same family for over 350 years. During the English Civil War in the mid-17th century, Skipton was the only royalist stronghold in northern England, and it was held under siege for 3 years from 1642. And those who were holding the castle under siege agreed honourable terms for the castle's surrender, allowing the occupants to leave unharmed. So I think they were impressed that the occupants of the castle had held out for so long. The castle was never again used as a defensive structure. When Lady Anne Clifford asked for permission to rebuild the damaged parts of the castle after the Civil War, she was told that the thickness of the walls had to be reduced and the roof made weaker so that it couldn't bear being fired upon. In several rooms there's evidence of former arrow slits being widened and turned into windows. Lady Anne is also responsible for planting the yew tree in the central courtyard of the castle, and she planted that in 1659, and it's still the same tree there today. It's a beautiful, graceful old tree that can be seen from so many of the rooms, and it really adds to the charm of the castle. After some lunch in a cafe, we walked by the canal to get back to the van. It's the Leeds and Liverpool Canal that goes through Skipton. It was opened in 1816 and it's England's longest inland waterway at 127 miles. The canal was responsible for Skipton's booming economy in the 19th century, carrying coal and wool, cotton, limestone and much more, and it's now a busy hub for canal cruising holidays. Despite the rain setting in for the rest of the afternoon, we thoroughly enjoyed our drive through the wonderful Yorkshire Dales, heading north for the little town of Hawes. Hawes lies in the heart of the Yorkshire Dales in Wensleydale, and it's home to the famous Wensleydale cheese. Cheesemaking has taken place in the Dales since at least the 12th century, at first by the Cistercian monks, and who then passed their cheesemaking knowledge on to the farmers' wives. It was quite some time since we'd last visited the Wensleydale Creamery in Hawes, and they've worked hard on updating their visitor experience. There's lots of accessible information about cheese-related facts and the process of cheese making, including a window into the factory itself, where cheese is still handcrafted by expert cheesemakers using traditional methods. The main focus of the visitor cheese experience is a demonstration of cheese making on a smaller scale. The demonstrator we had was excellent, explaining everything clearly with a bit of humour thrown in as well. And the overhead camera showed us a close-up view of the proceedings on a screen, so that was great. We learnt about the history of the Wensleydale Creamery, which first opened in 1897, and it's undergone one or two crisis points in its history where there was a danger of it completely closing, but it was saved in 1935 by a local businessman called Kit Calvert, and in 1992 by a management buyout. Business for the creamery was boosted soon after that by their connection with the Wallace and Gromit films, with the cheese-loving Wallace declaring his love for Wensleydale cheese. And part of the exhibition shows the creamery's now close relationship with Wallace and Gromit. Milk for the cheese is all sourced from farms in the local dales, where the cows have the benefit of the luscious rain-fed grass. You can learn all about the many stages that the milk goes through to become cheese, and your visitor experience is made complete by being able to sample all of the different cheeses that are made at Wensleydale. Mostly variations of the basic Wensleydale, but also some oak smoked cheese. All are completely delicious to cheese lovers like Phil and I. The visitor centre contains an excellent shop with all sorts of good quality gifts and cards. I bought a couple of the Thomas Joseph placemats to add to our collection that we already have at home. There's a good restaurant with lots of cheesy things on the menu, plus a separate cheese shop where, it would have been rude not to sample a bit more cheese, just to be sure of what we wanted to buy before we left. We were there right at the end of the day, so we felt obliged to taste a reasonable amount of cheese. And we did come away with a good selection of cheese that we kept for Christmas, which was coming up quite soon after we got back. So yeah, we just had a brilliant time. The rain didn't spoil it one bit. It just affects what you decide to do, that's all. So it was fine. It was a really lovely holiday. And actually we went home after we'd left the cheese factory, and we had been planning to stay another night and to do something else the next day, but we decided that we'd done lots of things and it was just time to go home. So I think that's it for today. I'm not going to waffle anymore at the end either. Just keep it there, and until I see you again, do take good care of yourself. Keep yourself nice and busy, and I will be back again very soon. Okay then, bye.